Everyone told Clara Whitmore the farm was cursed, and they were right. But it wasn't the land that was broken. It was the men who watched her suffer in silence while they waited for her to fail. When a quiet drifter named Elias Boone rode into town and uncovered the truth buried beneath her collapsing fields, everything changed. This is the story of a widow who refused to surrender, a stranger who chose integrity over profit, and a frontier farm that became something no one expected. If you want to see how one act of honesty destroyed years of calculated greed, stay with me until the end. And when you're done, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The morning Clara Whitmore found her husband face down in the west field, the sky had been so blue it hurt to look at. 3 years later, she still remembered that detail more than anything else. How perfect the weather had been on the worst day of her life. Now the sky was gray again, and she stood at the edge of that same field watching muddy water pool where wheat should have been growing. The drainage problem had gotten worse. Again. "Mama, the chickens are out." Clara turned to see her son Noah jogging toward her, his boots caked in mud, his hair sticking up in every direction the way it always did when he forgot to comb it. He was 9 now, growing fast, starting to look like his father around the eyes. "How many?" she asked. 4, maybe 5. I got 3 back in, but the others went into the brush." Clara exhaled slowly through her nose. "Leave them. We'll get them tonight." "But the fox, I know about the fox." Noah went quiet, sensing the edge in her voice. Clara softened. "It's fine. Go check the orchard gate. Make sure it's latched." He nodded and took off running, his gangly legs carrying him faster than his coordination could handle. She watched him go, then turned back to the flooded field. This was the 4th time this season. Every heavy rain, the west field turned into a swamp. The crops rotted before they could mature. The soil stayed too wet to replant. By the time it dried out enough to work, the planting season was over. She'd asked around town, hired 2 different men to look at it. Both told her the same thing. The land was no good. Bad drainage, unlucky position. Some fields were just cursed that way. But Clara knew better. Her husband Samuel had understood water. He'd grown up on a ranch in the hill country where irrigation meant the difference between survival and starvation. Before he died, he'd spent 2 full seasons planning the water system for this property, mapping every slope, every runoff point, every place the ground held moisture or let it pass through. The north irrigation line fed 3 fields, including this one. It ran underground from the creek through a series of wooden channels Samuel had built himself. The system had worked perfectly for the first 2 years. Then Samuel died, and 6 months later, the west field started flooding. It wasn't bad luck. It was a broken line. Clara had suspected it for over a year now, but suspecting and proving were 2 different things. The line ran deep. Digging it up meant tearing through hundreds of feet of compacted earth, pulling up the old channels, inspecting every joint. It was a 2-man job minimum, and it required someone who understood how the system worked. She didn't have 2 men. She didn't have money to hire them. And every person she'd asked had looked at her the way men in town looked at widows, patronizing, dismissive, like her worry was emotional rather than practical. So the field kept flooding. The crops kept failing. And Clara kept losing money she didn't have. She bent down and scooped up a handful of mud, letting it run through her fingers. The soil itself was good, rich, dark. It should have been growing the best wheat in the valley. Instead, it was drowning. A sound pulled her attention toward the road. Hoofbeats, slow and steady. Clara straightened, shading her eyes against the pale morning light. A rider was coming up the long drive toward the house. A man on a bay horse, leading a second horse behind him. He rode like someone who'd been in the saddle a long time, his posture easy, his hands light on the reins. Clara's stomach tightened. Strangers didn't come out this far unless they wanted something. She walked toward this house, keeping her stride purposeful. By the time she reached the porch, the man had reined in near the fence line. He didn't dismount right away, just sat there, looking at the property with the kind of quiet attention that made her uneasy. He was maybe 40, lean build, weathered face, dark hair going gray at the temples. He wore a plain coat and a hat pulled low, and there was a rifle strapped to his saddle, though his hand stayed well away from it. "Help you?" Clara called out. The man touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am, name's Elias Boone. I don't mean to intrude." Then don't. His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Fair enough. I'll make it quick. I was in town this morning, heard some men talking about a property out here. Widow's farm. Said the land was going under. Clara's jaw tightened. You hear a lot in town. More than I wanted to. Elias shifted in the saddle, glancing toward the flooded field. They were laughing about it. Said it was only a matter of time before you sold. One of them already had an offer drawn up. That's so. Seemed real pleased with himself. Clara crossed her arms. And you rode all the way out here to tell me that? No, ma'am. I rode out here because I used to do irrigation work. And from what I saw riding in, your problem isn't the land. She stared at him. You don't know anything about my land. I know a collapsed line when I see one. Elias nodded toward the west field. That field's holding water in the wrong place. Means something's broken underground. Probably the north feeder line, judging by the slope. Clara's pulse kicked up, but she kept her expression flat. You some kind of water engineer? I've dug my share of trenches. And what do you want for this expert opinion? Elias met her eyes. Nothing. Just telling you what I see. Nobody does that for free. I'm not nobody. The words hung in the air between them. Clara studied him, the calm way he sat his horse, the lack of performance in his tone. He wasn't trying to sell her anything, wasn't trying to charm her. He was just stating a fact. It unnerved her more than a sales pitch would have. I appreciate the concern, Clara said carefully, but I've had plenty of people tell me what's wrong with my land. None of them fixed it. That's because they didn't want to. Excuse me? Elias leaned forward slightly, resting his forearm on the saddle horn. Those men in town? They know exactly what's wrong with your field. They've known for a while. But if they fix it, you keep the farm. If they don't, you sell it cheap. Which do you think they'd prefer? The words hit like a slap. Clara opened her mouth, then closed it. Her mind was racing. She thought about the men she'd asked for help, the way they'd shaken their heads, the way they'd talked about bad luck and cursed land, the way they'd offered to buy the property for half what it was worth. You're saying they let it fail on purpose. I'm saying men like that don't miss an opportunity. Clara's hands curled into fists. And you're different. I didn't say that. I'm just not interested in your land. Then what are you interested in? Elias straightened. I'm interested in fixing what's broken. If you'll let me. For what price? A place to sleep. Barn's fine. I'll work the line, get your field draining proper. You don't owe me anything beyond that. Clara let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Nobody works for free. I'm not asking for free. I'm asking for a dry place to sleep and whatever you can spare for meals. That's it. Why? Elias's gaze didn't waver. Because I don't like watching people get cheated. The simplicity of it caught her off guard. There was no flourish, no manipulation, just a man stating his terms. Clara looked past him toward the flooded field, then back at his face. She didn't trust strangers, hadn't in a long time, but she also didn't have a lot of options left. If you're lying, she said slowly, I'll shoot you myself. Elias nodded. Understood. And if you try anything with me or my son, you won't make it to the barn. Wouldn't expect otherwise, Clara exhaled. Barn's around back. Patch the stall door if you're staying. It's been loose for 6 months. Elias touched his hat again. Appreciate it, ma'am. He nudged his horse forward, heading toward the barn without another word. Clara stood on the porch and watched him go, her heart pounding in a way she didn't entirely understand. She didn't know if she'd just made the smartest decision of her life or the dumbest, but she was about to find out. By evening, Elias had patched the stall door, mucked out 2 of the stalls, and repaired a broken hinge on the feed bin. Clara watched him from the house, suspicious of the efficiency. Men who worked that fast usually wanted something. She made stew for dinner, nothing fancy, just venison and potatoes and whatever vegetables hadn't rotted in the root cellar. When it was ready, she brought a bowl out to the barn. Elias was sitting on an overturned crate, rubbing down his horse with a rag. He looked up when she approached, then stood. Thought you might be hungry, Clara said, holding out the bowl. Appreciate it. He took it carefully, like she might change her mind. Clara folded her arms. You always this quiet? Depends on the company. You don't talk much for someone who rides onto a stranger's property with advice. Elias spooned stew into his mouth, chewed, swallowed. Didn't figure you wanted small talk. I don't. Then we're on the same page. Clara almost smiled. Almost. My son's curious about you. He'll ask questions. That all right with you? Long as you don't fill his head with nonsense. I'll stick to facts. Good. Clara hesitated. You really think you can fix the line? Elias set the bowl down on the crate and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. I think if we dig in the right place, we'll find out what's wrong. After that, it's just work. How long? Depends on how bad the damage is. Could be a week, could be 3. Clara's stomach sank. 3 weeks of feeding a stranger. 3 weeks of him being here, in her space. 3 weeks of waiting to see if he was telling the truth or just another man looking to take advantage. But what choice did she have? All right, she said. We start tomorrow. Elias nodded. First light? First light. Noah was waiting for her when she came back inside, sitting at the kitchen table with a book he wasn't reading. Who is he? Noah asked immediately. A man who says he can fix the West Field. You believe him? Clara pulled out a chair and sat down across from her son. I don't know yet. Papa used to say you could tell a lot about a man by his horse. He did. His horse looks healthy. Clara smiled faintly. That's a start. Noah chewed his lip, the way he always did when he was thinking hard about something. Are we going to lose the farm? The question knocked the air out of her lungs. No, Clara said firmly, we're not. But the field, I'll take care of the field. How? By fixing it. Clara reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You let me worry about that. You worry about school and chickens and staying out of trouble. Noah didn't look convinced, but he nodded. That night, Clara lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about Samuel, about the way he used to stand in the West Field with his hands on his hips, explaining water tables and soil grades like they were the most important things in the world. She thought about the men in town, the ones who smiled at her in church, and then whispered behind her back about the widow who couldn't manage her own land. And she thought about Elias Boone sleeping in her barn, a stranger who'd ridden in with nothing but a horse and a promise. She didn't trust him, but she was going to let him try. The next morning, Clara found Elias already outside, standing at the edge of the West Field with a shovel in his hand. The sun was barely up, the air still cool and damp. You're early, Clara said, walking over with 2 tin cups of coffee. Habit. Elias took the cup she offered. Figured we'd start at the North Post. That's where your husband's line comes in from the creek, right? Clara nodded. He built the whole system himself. Took him 2 years. He knew what he was doing. He did. Elias crouched down and ran his hand along the ground, feeling for something Clara couldn't see. If the line's collapsed, it'll be somewhere between here and the second drainage point. We'll have to dig it up in sections. How deep? 3 feet, maybe 4. Clara's shoulders sagged. That was a lot of digging. Elias stood and looked at her. You don't have to help. It's my land. Still. I'm helping. Elias didn't argue. He just handed her a second shovel. They worked in silence, breaking the earth in careful rows, following the line Samuel had laid years ago. The ground was hard in some places, soft in others. Clara's hands blistered within the first hour, but she didn't stop. Around mid-morning, Noah appeared with a jug of water and 3 biscuits wrapped in cloth. Mama said you need to eat, he announced, handing the bundle to Elias. Elias smiled. Your mama's smart. Noah lingered, watching as Elias wiped dirt off his hands and bit into a biscuit. You really think you can fix it? I think there's a good chance. What if you can't? Elias glanced at Clara, then back at Noah. Then we'll figure out something else. Noah seemed satisfied with that. He sat down on the edge of the trench and dangled his legs over the side, watching them dig. You got a ranch of your own? Noah asked after a while. Not anymore. How come? Sold it. Why? Elias paused, resting the shovel against his leg. Sometimes you hold on to things longer than you should. When I finally let go, it felt right. Noah frowned, processing that. You miss it? Some days. What do you do now? I move around, help where I can. That sounds lonely. Elias's expression shifted, something unguarded passing across his face before he caught it. Sometimes, he admitted, but it's honest work. Clara listened while she dug, saying nothing. There was a sadness in Elias's voice that he didn't try to hide, and it made her wonder what he'd left behind when he sold that ranch. By noon, they'd uncovered the first section of the line. The wooden channel was intact, the joint solid. Elias inspected it carefully, then moved on to the next section. It was another 2 hours before they found the break. There, Elias said quietly, pointing. Clara leaned over the trench. The wooden channel had split clean through, the break so clean it looked almost deliberate. Water was seeping out into the surrounding soil, pooling in the trench. "Can you fix it?" Clara asked. Elias crouched down, running his fingers along the edges of the break. "Yeah, but it's going to take some time. I'll need to pull this whole section out, cut new wood, fit it back in, and we'll need to check the rest of the line to make sure there aren't more breaks." Clara's heart sank. "How long?" 2 weeks. Maybe 3. That's what you said before. And I'm saying it again." Clara closed her eyes, frustration boiling up inside her. 2 weeks. 3 weeks. Another season lost. "Hey!" She opened her eyes. Elias was looking at her, his expression calm. "We'll get it done," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Clara wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this stranger who'd ridden onto her property with nothing but a shovel and a promise was going to save her farm. But belief was a luxury she couldn't afford. "All right," she said finally. "Let's keep digging." What? Over the next week, they fell into a rhythm. Elias worked the trench every morning, Clara beside him. Noah brought water and food, asked endless questions, and occasionally tried to help dig until Clara sent him back to his chores. The break in the north line turned out to be just the beginning. They found 2 more splits further down, both of them old, both of them leaking water into the soil. By the end of the first week, they'd pulled up nearly 100 feet of damaged channel. "This didn't happen by accident," Elias said one evening, sitting on the edge of the trench with his shirt soaked through with sweat. Clara, equally exhausted, looked over at him. "What do you mean?" "These breaks." He gestured at the pile of splintered wood they'd pulled from the ground. "They're too clean, too precise. Someone went out of their way to make sure this line failed." Clara's blood went cold. "You think someone sabotaged it?" "I think someone wanted your crops to fail." She thought about the men in town, the offers to buy her land, the sympathetic looks that never came with actual help. "Who?" she asked, though she already had a guess. "Can't say for sure, but I'd start with whoever's been making offers on the property." Clara's jaw tightened. "Warren Pruitt." Elias raised an eyebrow. "The man at the land office? He's tried to buy me out 3 times. Always acts like he's doing me a favor. He probably thinks he is." "By destroying my husband's work?" Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. Clara stood abruptly, brushing dirt off her pants. "If I find out he did this..." "You'll what?" Elias's voice was quiet but firm. "March into town and accuse him? With what proof?" "The proof is in the ground. And he'll say it rotted. Say you didn't maintain it. Blame you for the failure." Clara's hands shook with anger. "So he just gets away with it?" "No." Elias stood, meeting her gaze. "You fix the line. You grow the crops. And you make so much money he can't touch you." Clara stared at him. "That's your plan? Just succeed?" "Best revenge there is." She wanted to argue, wanted to storm into town and drag Warren Pruitt out of his office by his collar, but Elias was right. Accusations without proof wouldn't do anything except make her look desperate. "Fine," Clara said through gritted teeth. "We fix the line." "We fix the line," Elias agreed. By the second week, word had spread through town that Clara Whitmore had hired a man to fix her irrigation system. It didn't take long for the rumors to start. The first person to show up was Martha Calloway, the preacher's wife, who arrived unannounced with a basket of muffins and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just thought I'd check on you," Martha said, standing on the porch like she had every right to be there. "Heard you had a man staying in your barn." Clara, covered in dirt and too tired for politeness, didn't invite her inside. "He's fixing the water line." "Oh, how lovely." Martha's smile tightened. "And he's staying here? On the property?" "In the barn." "Well, that's practical, I suppose." Clara crossed her arms. Something you want to say, Martha? No, just people talk, you know. A widow living alone with a strange man. It doesn't look. I don't care how it looks. Martha blinked, clearly taken aback. Clara, thank you for the muffins. Clara took the basket and shut the door. That night, Clara told Elias about the visit. Town's going to talk no matter what you do, Elias said. He was sitting on the porch steps, sharpening a blade. You worried about it? No. You sure? Clara sat down beside him. I've been the subject of gossip since Samuel died. If they want to add your name to the list, let them. Elias glanced at her, something like respect in his expression. You're tougher than most people give you credit for. I've had to be. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the scrape of metal against stone. Your boy's got good instincts, Elias said after a while. Noticed him watching the way I set the joints today. Asked smart questions. Clara felt a small swell of pride. He's always been observant. He misses his father. Every day. Elias nodded slowly. That's hard on a kid. It's hard on everyone. Yeah. Elias set the blade aside and looked out toward the dark fields. But you're doing right by him. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They sat together on the porch until the stars came out, and for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt almost peaceful. By the third week, the north line was fully repaired. Elias cut new channels, fitted them into place, sealed every joint with pitch and binding. Clara worked beside him every step of the way, learning the mechanics of the system her husband had built. The day they opened the line and let water flow through, Clara held her breath. The water ran clean, steady, no leaks, no breaks. The west field began to drain. Noah let out a whoop and ran toward the field, splashing through the receding water. Clara watched him, her throat tight with emotion she couldn't name. Elias stood beside her, covered in mud, exhausted, and grinning like he'd just won something. It worked, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. Told you it would. She turned to look at him, this quiet stranger who'd walked onto her property and changed everything. Thank you, she said. Elias's grin softened into something gentler. Don't thank me yet. Let's see if the crops come in. But Clara knew they would. For the first time in 3 years, the land felt alive again. The crops came in better than anyone expected. By late summer, the west field was thick with wheat, the stalks tall and golden under the August sun. The orchard, which had barely produced enough apples to fill 2 baskets the year before, now hung heavy with fruit. Clara walked through the rows every morning, inspecting the trees with a mixture of disbelief and fierce satisfaction. Elias had stayed. He'd finished the irrigation line, then moved on to other repairs around the property. The sagging fence along the eastern boundary, the rotted boards on the equipment shed, the broken wheel on the wagon. He worked without being asked, and Clara stopped questioning it after the first month. Noah followed him everywhere. Why do you measure twice? Noah asked one afternoon, watching Elias cut a replacement board for the porch railing. Because wood's expensive and mistakes are permanent. Papa used to say that. Elias paused, glancing at the boy. Your papa was smart. Mama says you're smart too. Your mama's generous. Noah grinned. She doesn't say nice things about most people. Elias smiled faintly and went back to cutting. Clara, standing in the doorway with a basket of laundry, pretended she hadn't heard the conversation, but her chest felt tight in a way she couldn't quite explain. The truth was, Elias had become part of the rhythm of the farm. She didn't know when it had happened, somewhere between the 3rd week and the 2nd month, but his presence no longer felt like an intrusion. It felt necessary, like he'd always been there, and that scared her more than she wanted to admit. One evening, after Noah had gone to bed, Clara found Elias sitting on the porch steps, carving something from a piece of scrap wood. She sat down beside him without asking. What are you making? She asked. Horse. He held it up, a rough figure, barely recognizable, but clearly 4-legged. For your boy. Figured he might like it. Clara's throat tightened. You don't have to do that. I know. Then why? Elias set the carving down on the step between them. Because he asked me what I did before I came here, and I told him I used to make things. He asked if I'd make him something, so I am. Clara stared at the wooden horse. It was a small thing, insignificant in the scope of everything else, but it felt bigger than that. He talks about you, Clara said quietly. All the time. Elias said this. Elias showed me that. That bother you? I don't know. Elias looked at her, his expression unreadable. You want me to keep my distance from him? No? The word came out faster than she intended. No, I just... She stopped, unsure how to finish. You're worried he'll get attached. Clara's hands twisted in her lap. You're going to leave eventually. That's what you do. You move around, and when you go, he's going to feel it. And you? Elias asked quietly. Clara's breath caught. She didn't answer. Elias picked up the carving again, turning it over in his hands. I'm not planning on leaving. You say that now. I mean it. People always mean it, Clara said, her voice sharper than she intended. And then something changes. Someone better comes along, or the work dries up, or they just get tired of staying in one place. Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he set the carving down again and turned to face her fully. I sold my ranch because I couldn't stand being there anymore, he said. Every corner of that place reminded me of things I'd lost. My wife died there. My daughter, too. Fever took them both in the same winter. After that, the land felt like a grave I was living on top of. Clara's chest constricted. She hadn't known, hadn't even guessed. I'm sorry, she whispered. Elias shook his head. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I know what it's like to lose someone and have to keep going. And I know what it's like to wake up one day and realize you've been going through the motions for so long you forgot what it feels like to actually live. He looked at her, his eyes steady. This place, your farm, your boy, you, it's the first thing that's felt real to me in 5 years. So no, I'm not planning on leaving, not unless you tell me to. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she thought he might hear it. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process the weight of what he'd just told her. I'm not telling you to leave, she said finally. Elias nodded slowly. All right then. They sat in silence after that, the night settling around them. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. The air smelled like dry grass and wood smoke. Clara thought about Samuel, about the way she'd loved him, the way his absence had carved a hole in her life that nothing seemed to fill. She'd told herself she didn't need anyone else, that she and Noah could manage alone. But sitting here beside Elias, she felt something shift. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The idea that maybe, someday, the hole wouldn't feel so deep. She didn't say any of that out loud, but she didn't move away either, and Elias stayed right where he was. By the time harvest season arrived, the town had started to take notice. Clara brought her wheat to the mill in early September, and the miller stared at the load like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. This came from your west field? He asked. It did. How much you got left? 3 more loads this size. The miller let out a low whistle. Clara, this is the best crop I've seen all year. How the hell did you pull this off? Fixed the irrigation line. Who fixed it? Clara hesitated. She knew the question wasn't innocent. The whole town had been whispering about Elias for months, about the stranger living in the widow's barn, about the impropriety of it, about what it meant that she'd let him stay. Does it matter? She said evenly. The miller grinned. I suppose it doesn't. Long as you can keep producing like this, you'll have buyers lining up. Clara left the mill with more money than she'd seen in 2 years. She tucked it into the inside pocket of her coat and walked back to the wagon, where Elias was waiting. How much? He asked. Clara told him. Elias let out a breath. That's good. Real good. It's because of you. It's because of the land. I just fixed what was broken. Clara climbed up onto the wagon seat beside him. You did more than that. Elias didn't argue. He just picked up the reins and clicked his tongue at the horses. As they rode back through town, Clara noticed people staring. Women standing outside the general store, heads bent together. Men tipping their hats but not meeting her eyes. She'd lived in this town her whole life, and she'd never felt more like an outsider. They think we're sleeping together, Clara said flatly. Elias glanced at her. Does that bother you? Should it? Only if you let it. Clara looked at him. You don't care what they think. I stopped caring what people think a long time ago. Must be nice. Elias smiled faintly.
It's lonely sometimes, but it's honest. Clara thought about that as they left town and headed back toward the farm. Honest. She liked that word. It felt solid, real. When they got home, Noah was waiting for them in the yard, practically bouncing with excitement. "Did you sell it all?" he asked breathlessly.
"Every bushel," Clara said, climbing down from the wagon. Noah let out a whoop and threw his arms around her waist. Clara laughed, a real, genuine laugh, and hugged him back. Elias watched them from the wagon seat, something soft and unguarded in his expression. "Come on," Clara said, pulling back and ruffling Noah's hair. "Let's go make something decent for dinner. We're celebrating." That night they ate roasted chicken and potatoes, and Clara opened a jar of preserves she'd been saving for a special occasion. Noah talked nonstop about everything he wanted to do with the farm now that they had money again, and Elias listened with the kind of patience Clara had only ever seen in her husband. After dinner, Noah went outside to check on the chickens, and Clara started clearing the dishes. Elias stood to help, and she didn't stop him. "You didn't have to stay for dinner," Clara said as she scraped plates into the scrap bucket. "You invited me. You could have said no." "Why would I do that?" Clara paused, her hand stilling in the wash basin. "Because you've done your job. The line's fixed. The crops are in. You could leave tomorrow, and no one would blame you." Elias set a stack of plates on the counter beside her. "You want me to leave?" "No." The word came out quieter than she intended. "No, I don't." "Then I'm staying." Clara turned to look at him. He was standing close, closer than she'd realized, and for a moment the kitchen felt impossibly small. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you want to stay?" Elias held her gaze. "Because I like it here. I like the work. I like your boy. And I like you." Clara's breath hitched. "I'm not asking for anything," Elias continued. "I'm not trying to take your husband's place. I'm just telling you the truth." Clara's hands were trembling. She gripped the edge of the basin to steady herself. "I don't know if I'm ready for this." "I'm not asking you to be." "Then what are you asking?" "Nothing." Elias stepped back, giving her space. "I'm just telling you I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to." Clara stared at him, her heart pounding. She wanted to say something, wanted to tell him she felt it too, whatever this was, but the words wouldn't come, so she just nodded. Elias nodded back. Then he picked up his hat from the table and headed for the door. "Elias!" Clara called after him. He stopped, turning back. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Elias's expression softened. "You don't have to thank me." "I know, but I am." He touched the brim of his hat and stepped outside, leaving Clara alone in the kitchen with her racing thoughts and the faint smell of wood smoke clinging to the air. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of raised voices outside. She pulled on her boots and hurried out onto the porch, her stomach dropping when she saw Warren Pruitt standing in the yard. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and expensively dressed, with the kind of face that smiled too easily and meant nothing by it. Elias was standing between Warren and the house, his posture tense. "Something I can help you with, Warren?" Clara called out, her voice sharp. Warren turned, his smile widening. "Clara, good morning. I was just having a chat with your hired man here." "He's not hired, and you're trespassing." Warren's smile didn't falter. "Now, that's not very neighborly." "You're not my neighbor. You're a land speculator. What do you want?" Warren sighed, like she was being unreasonable. "I heard about your harvest. Impressive, really. I wanted to congratulate you." "Congratulations delivered. Now get off my property." "Clara, I'm here as a friend." "You don't have friends. You have transactions." Warren's smile finally slipped. "I'm trying to help you." "By doing what? Waiting for me to fail so you can buy my land for pennies?" Warren's eyes flickered toward Elias, then back to Clara. "I don't know what lies this man's been filling your head with." "He didn't have to tell me anything," Clara snapped. "I figured it out on my own. You knew about the irrigation line. You knew exactly what was wrong with it, and you let me struggle because you thought I'd give up." Warren's jaw tightened. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth. You have no proof." "I have a repaired line and a successful harvest. That's all the proof I need." Warren stared at her, his expression hardening. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was trusting people in this town. Warren looked at Elias again, something cold in his gaze. You should be careful who you take advice from, Clara. Strangers don't always have your best interests at heart. Elias didn't respond. He just stood there, silent and immovable. Warren tipped his hat. Good day, Mrs. Whitmore. He climbed onto his horse and rode off without another word. Clara watched him go, her hands shaking with anger. When he was out of sight, she turned to Elias. You all right? She asked. Fine. You? Furious, Elias nodded. He's going to make trouble. Let him try. But even as she said it, Clara felt a flicker of unease. Warren Pruitt wasn't the kind of man who took rejection well, and he had connections, people in town who owed him favors, people who'd side with him over a widow and a drifter. She pushed the thought aside. She'd deal with Warren if he came back. Right now, she had a farm to run. Over the next few weeks, the trouble started small. A fence post knocked over, a gate left open, letting the chickens out, tools that went missing and turned up days later in strange places. Clara told herself it was coincidence, bad luck. But Elias wasn't convinced. Someone's trying to rattle you, he said one evening, standing in the barn with a hammer that had gone missing 3 days ago and mysteriously reappeared in the feed bin. You think it's Warren? I think it's someone who doesn't want you to succeed. Clara's jaw tightened. Well, they're going to be disappointed. But the incidents continued. A section of fence cut clean through, a water trough tipped over, small things, nothing catastrophic, but enough to make Clara constantly on edge. One night, she woke to the sound of something crashing outside. She grabbed Samuel's rifle from beside the bed and ran out onto the porch. Elias was already there, standing in the yard with a lantern. What happened? Clara asked, her heart pounding. Someone spooked the horses. They knocked over the water barrel. Did you see who? No, but they were here. I heard them running off toward the road. Clara's hands tightened on the rifle. This has to stop. It will, but not tonight. We should go to the sheriff. And tell him what? That someone tipped over a barrel? He'll laugh you out of his office. Clara hated that he was right. They stood in the yard together, the lantern casting long shadows across the dirt. Clara felt exhausted, not from the work, but from the constant vigilance. She was tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of waiting for the next thing to go wrong. I won't let them take this from you, Elias said quietly. Clara looked at him. You can't promise that. I can try. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that his presence alone was enough to keep the wolves at bay. But she'd learned the hard way that promises didn't stop desperate men. The breaking point came in late October. Clara was in town, picking up supplies at the general store, when she overheard 2 men talking near the counter. Heard Pruitt's planning to make another offer on the Whitmore place. She turned him down twice already. What makes him think she'll sell now? Because he's got leverage this time. That drifter she's been keeping? Turns out he's got a past. Clara froze, her hand tightening around the handle of her basket. What kind of past? The second man asked. Don't know the details, but Pruitt says he's got proof the man's dangerous. Says if she doesn't sell, he'll make sure the whole town knows what kind of person she's letting around her boy. Clara's vision went red. She slammed her basket down on the counter, making both men jump. They turned, their faces going pale when they saw her standing there. If Warren Pruitt has something to say about Elias Boone, Clara said, her voice low and dangerous, he can say it to my face. Neither man responded. Clara paid for her supplies and walked out of the store, her blood boiling. She drove the wagon straight to Warren's office and stormed inside without knocking. Warren looked up from his desk, startled. Clara, I wasn't expecting... What are you telling people about Elias? Warren leaned back in his chair, his expression smoothing into something almost sympathetic. I'm simply sharing information, for your safety. What information? The man you've allowed onto your property has a history of violence. Clara's stomach dropped. You're lying. I wish I was. Warren pulled a folded piece of paper from his desk drawer and held it out. This is a report from a town 200 miles north. Elias Boone was involved in a shooting 3 years ago. A man died. Clara stared at the paper, her hands trembling. She didn't take it. Even if that's true, she said slowly, it means he's dangerous, Warren interrupted. And you're a widow with a young son. What do you think people are going to say when they find out you've been harboring a killer? Clara's chest felt tight. Get out of my way. Clara, I'm trying to help you. No, you're trying to scare me into selling, and it's not going to work. She turned and walked out, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. When she got home, Elias was in the barn, mending a saddle. He looked up when she walked in, and his expression shifted immediately. What happened? Clara told him everything. When she finished, Elias set the saddle aside and stood. His face was unreadable. It's true, he said quietly. Clara's breath caught. What? The shooting. It happened. I killed a man. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Why? Elias looked at her, his eyes dark. He broke into my house, went after my daughter. I stopped him. You were protecting your family. I was, but the man I killed had friends, powerful friends. They made sure everyone knew my name, made sure I couldn't stay. Clara's throat tightened. So you left. I didn't have a choice, and you've been running ever since. Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. Clara crossed the barn and stood in front of him. Warren's going to use this against you, against us. I know. He'll tell the whole town. They'll come after you. Probably. Elias, I'll leave, he said quietly. Tonight, if you want. I won't let this fall on you and Noah. Clara's heart clenched. I don't want you to leave. Then what do you want? Clara looked at him. This man who'd walked onto her property with nothing but a promise and rebuilt her life piece by piece. She thought about Warren Pruitt and the men in town who'd rather see her fail than succeed. She thought about the crops in her fields and the money in her pocket and the way Noah smiled when Elias taught him something new. And she made her choice. I want you to stay, she said, and I want to fight. Elias stared at her. Clara, I'm done letting people like Warren Pruitt tell me what I can and can't do. I'm done being afraid. She stepped closer. You didn't do anything wrong. You protected your family. And if anyone in this town has a problem with that, they can take it up with me. Elias's expression cracked, something raw and vulnerable breaking through. You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Elias reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and steady. All right, he said. We fight. Clara nodded, her throat tight. Together. Together. The next morning, Clara walked into town with her head high and Elias beside her. She'd spent half the night lying awake, rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd hold herself when people stared. But when they reached Main Street and she saw the clusters of women outside the mercantile, the whispers starting before she'd even stepped down from the wagon, all her prepared words evaporated. Let them talk, Elias said quietly, tying off the reins. I'm trying. You're doing fine. Clara wasn't so sure. Her hands were shaking as she pushed open the door to the general store, and the conversation inside died the moment she crossed the threshold. 4 women stood near the fabric display, their faces a mixture of shock and barely concealed judgment. Martha Calloway was among them. Clara, Martha said, her voice dripping with false concern. We were just talking about you. I'm sure you were. Clara walked past them toward the counter, where Henry Burke, the store owner, suddenly became very interested in his ledger. Is it true? One of the other women asked. Clara didn't know her name. About that man you're keeping? Clara turned slowly. His name is Elias, and yes, it's true he's staying on my property. It's also true he saved my farm when no one else in this town would lift a finger to help. Martha's mouth tightened. Clara, we're only concerned for your safety. A man with a violent past defended his family, Clara interrupted, from someone who broke into his home. If that makes him dangerous, then I don't know what you'd call the people spreading rumors about him. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Henry cleared his throat. What can I get you today, Mrs. Whitmore? Clara listed her supplies, her voice steady despite the heat crawling up her neck. While Henry gathered everything, the women continued to stare. Clara refused to look at them. She paid, collected her parcels, and walked out with her spine straight and her jaw clenched so hard her teeth ached. Elias was waiting by the wagon. He didn't ask how it went, He just helped her load the supplies and climbed up beside her. They were halfway home when Clara finally spoke. That was harder than I thought it would be. You did good. I wanted to scream at them, but you didn't. Clara let out a shaky breath. How do you do it? How do you just not care what people think? Elias was quiet for a moment, his hands easy on the reins. I care. I just care more about what's true than what people say. And what's true? That you're the strongest person I've ever met. And that farm of yours is proof of it. Clara's throat tightened. She looked out at the road ahead, blinking against the sting in her eyes. When they got home, Noah was in the yard throwing a stick for the dog they'd taken in 2 months ago, a scruffy mutt who'd shown up half-starved and decided to stay. The boy looked up when he heard the wagon, his face breaking into a smile that faded the moment he saw Clara's expression. What happened? He asked, jogging over. Nothing. Clara climbed down, forcing brightness into her voice. Just town being town. Noah looked at Elias, then back at his mother. They're saying things about Elias, aren't they? Clara's stomach dropped. Who told you that? Tommy Martin. At school yesterday. He said his dad said Elias is a criminal. Elias went very still. Clara crouched down to Noah's level. What did you say to Tommy? I told him he was lying. Then I pushed him. Noah. He called you a bad name, Mama. I wasn't going to just stand there. Clara closed her eyes. Did you get in trouble? Teacher sent me home early. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. Clara pulled him into a hug, her chest aching. You can't go around pushing people, baby. Even when they're wrong? Even then, Noah pulled back, his young face set in stubborn lines that reminded Clara painfully of Samuel. But Elias isn't a criminal. He's good. He fixed the farm and he teaches me things and he's nice to you. I know that. Then why do they keep saying he's bad? Clara looked up at Elias, who was standing a few feet away with an expression she couldn't read. Because people are scared of what they don't understand, Clara said carefully. And instead of asking questions, they make up stories. That's stupid. It is. But it's also how the world works sometimes. Noah crossed his arms. Well, it shouldn't. Clara almost smiled. No, it shouldn't. That night after Noah went to bed, Clara found Elias in the barn. He was checking on one of the horses, running his hands down her legs, making sure she hadn't picked up any stones. Noah got in a fight at school, Clara said from the doorway. Elias straightened. I heard. He was defending you. I know. This is my fault. I shouldn't have. Don't. Elias's voice was firm. Don't do that. None of this is your fault. If I'd just kept quiet, if I'd let you go when Warren started spreading rumors, then Warren would have won, and you'd still be alone trying to keep this place going with no help and no hope. Elias crossed the barn to stand in front of her. You made the right choice. Noah got sent home from school. He stood up for someone he cares about. That's not a bad thing. He's 9. And he's brave, like his mother. Clara shook her head. I don't feel brave. I feel like I'm dragging everyone down with me. Elias reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough, calloused from months of work. You're not dragging anyone. We're choosing to stand with you. There's a difference. Clara looked up at him. In the dim light of the barn, his face was half in shadow, but his eyes were clear and steady. She thought about the first day he'd ridden onto her property, a stranger with nothing but a horse and a promise. She thought about all the ways he'd kept that promise, and then some. I don't know what I did to deserve you, she said quietly. Elias's mouth quirked. You let me fix your irrigation line. I'm serious. So am I. He squeezed her hand. You gave me a reason to stay when I'd been running for 3 years. That's worth more than you know. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back, but not before one escaped down her cheek. Elias reached up and brushed it away with his thumb, the gesture so gentle it made her chest ache. We're going to get through this, he said. You don't know that. I know you, and I know you don't quit. Clara let out a shaky laugh. Stubborn, you mean? Determined. She looked at him for a long moment, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Elias went still for a heartbeat, then his arms came around her, holding her close. Clara pressed her face against his shoulder and breathed in the smell of hay and horses and the faint scent of soap. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For staying. Elias's arms tightened. I'm not going anywhere. They stood like that for a long time, the night quiet around them, except for the soft sounds of the horses shifting in their stalls. When Clara finally pulled back, her face was dry and her resolve was stronger. What do we do now? She asked. We keep working, keep proving them wrong. And if Warren escalates? Then we deal with it. Clara nodded. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was honest, and right now, honest was all she had. Warren escalated. 2 days later, the sheriff showed up at the farm with a deputy Clara didn't recognize. She was in the kitchen when she heard the horses, and her stomach dropped the moment she looked out the window. Stay inside, she told Noah, who was at the table doing his schoolwork. Why? Just do it. She stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Sheriff Grant was a man in his 50s, balding and thick around the middle, with the kind of face that always looked tired. He'd known Samuel, had been at his funeral. Clara had thought that meant something. Apparently not. Mrs. Whitmore, Grant said, dismounting. We need to have a word. About what? About Elias Boone. Clara's jaw tightened. What about him? I've received a complaint. Multiple complaints, actually. People are concerned about having a man with a violent history living this close to town. Elias hasn't done anything wrong. That's not what I'm hearing. Then you're hearing lies, Grant sighed. Clara, I'm not here to argue. I'm here to ask some questions. Where is he? In the fields. I'm going to need to speak with him. Then you can do it with me present. Grant studied her for a moment, then nodded. Fine. Go get him. Clara found Elias near the orchard, pruning branches in preparation for winter. He looked up when he heard her coming, his expression shifting when he saw her face. Sheriff's here, she said. Elias set down the pruning shears. All right. They walked back to the house together. Grant and his deputy were waiting by the porch, and Clara saw Noah watching through the window despite her instructions to stay inside. Mr. Boone, Grant said, I understand you've been staying on this property for several months now. That's right. And Mrs. Whitmore has been employing you? I work the farm in exchange for room and board. You have any other income? Elias's expression didn't change. No. No family? No property elsewhere? No. Grant pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. I have a report here from a town called Ridgefield. It says you were involved in a shooting 3 years ago. A man named Joseph Carver died. That true? It is. You kill him? I did. Clara's heart was pounding, but Elias's voice was steady, almost calm. Grant frowned. Care to explain the circumstances? He broke into my home. My daughter was there. I stopped him. Stopped him how? Shot him. Were you charged? No. The judge ruled it self-defense. Grant studied the paper in his hand. Says here Carver's brother made some accusations afterward, said you provoked the whole thing. Carver's brother wasn't there. I was. You got any proof of that? Court records. You want them? I'll get them. Grant was quiet for a moment, then folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. Look, I'm not here to relitigate a case that's already been settled, but you have to understand, people in town are nervous. They don't know you, and when they hear about something like this, they worry. I haven't threatened anyone, Elias said evenly. I haven't caused any trouble. I work Mrs. Whitmore's land and keep to myself. I know, but perception matters. Clara stepped forward. So what are you saying, Sheriff? That Elias has to leave because people are gossiping? I'm saying it might be easier for everyone if he did. Easier for who? Warren Pruitt? Grant's face tightened. This has nothing to do with Warren. Of course it does. He's the one spreading these rumors. He's the one trying to scare me into selling my land. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth, and you know it. Grant looked uncomfortable. Clara, I understand you're grateful to Mr. Boone for the work he's done here, but you have to think about your reputation, about your son. My son is fine, better than fine, and my reputation doesn't concern me half as much as keeping my farm running. I'm trying to help you. Then arrest Warren Pruitt for harassment. Grant let out a long breath. I can't do that. Because he has money, and I don't? Because I have no evidence of wrongdoing. And you have no evidence against Elias either. So unless you're here to arrest him, I'd appreciate it if you left my property. Grant looked at Elias, then back at Clara. You're making a mistake. It's mine to make. Grant tipped his hat. Good day, Mrs. Whitmore. He and his deputy mounted their horses and rode off. Clara watched them go, her hands trembling with anger and adrenaline. You all right? Elias asked quietly. No, but I will be. She turned and walked back into the house, where Noah was still standing by the window, his face pale. Is Elias going to jail? He asked. No, baby, he's not. But the sheriff doesn't have a reason to arrest him, and he won't. Noah didn't look convinced, but he nodded. Clara pulled him into a hug and held on tight, wishing she felt as certain as she sounded. Over the next week, the pressure mounted. Clara's regular buyers for her produce suddenly stopped placing orders. When she went into town to ask why, they gave vague excuses about changing suppliers or cutting costs. But Clara knew the truth. Someone had gotten to them. Then the bank sent a letter saying they needed to reassess her loan terms. The mortgage on the farm, which had been manageable before, suddenly came with new conditions and higher interest. Clara sat at the kitchen table with the letter in her hand, staring at the numbers until they blurred. How much? Elias asked from the doorway. Clara looked up. More than I have. How much more? She told him. Elias's jaw tightened. That's robbery. It's legal robbery. The bank manager is friends with Warren. He's doing him a favor. Can you fight it? With what? I don't have a lawyer. I don't have proof. All I have is a farm and a load of crops no one wants to buy. Elias crossed the room and sat down across from her. What about buyers outside the valley? Clara blinked. What? You said your regular buyers won't take your produce. Fine. Find new ones. There are towns a day's ride from here that don't know Warren Pruitt and don't care about his grudges. I don't have connections in those towns. Then make them. Clara stared at him. It was such a simple idea, she couldn't believe she hadn't thought of it herself. She'd been so focused on fighting the people in her own town that she'd forgotten there was a whole world beyond it. That could work, she said slowly. It will work. Your crops are the best in the valley. People will pay for quality. Clara felt a flicker of hope. How do I even start? Load up the wagon, take samples, knock on doors, same way I found this place. Clara almost smiled. You make it sound easy. It's not, but it's possible. She looked at the letter again, then set it aside. All right, we'll try. The next morning, Clara and Elias loaded the wagon with crates of apples, sacks of wheat, and jars of preserves. Noah wanted to come, but Clara told him he had to stay home and keep an eye on the farm. What if someone comes while you're gone? He asked. Then you lock the doors and don't open them for anyone except us. Noah didn't like it, but he nodded. Clara and Elias set out at dawn, heading east toward a town called Millbrook. It was a full day's ride, and by the time they arrived, the sun was low on the horizon and Clara's back ached from sitting. Millbrook was bigger than Clara's town, with a main street lined with shops and a bustling market square. Clara felt out of place immediately, but Elias seemed unbothered. Where do we start? She asked. General store. They'll know who's buying. They found the general store at the corner of Main and 2nd, a large building with a painted sign and wide windows. Clara took a deep breath and walked inside. The owner was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an efficient manner. She looked Clara up and down, then glanced at the crates Elias was carrying. Help you? She asked. I'm Clara Whitmore. I run a farm about 30 miles west. I'm looking for buyers for my produce. The woman raised an eyebrow. What kind of produce? Clara gestured for Elias to set down the crates. She opened one and pulled out an apple, handing it over. The woman examined it, turning it over in her hands, then took a bite. Her expression changed. This is good, she said after a moment. Real good. Where'd you say your farm was? West Valley, near Crestwood. Never heard of it. Most people haven't. The woman took another bite of the apple, chewing thoughtfully. How much can you supply? Depends on what you need. I've got apples, wheat, vegetables, preserves. I can do regular deliveries if the price is right. The woman set the apple down and wiped her hands on her apron. Let me see the rest. Clara spent the next hour showing samples, answering questions, negotiating prices. By the time she walked out of that store, She had an order for 2 crates of apples and 3 sacks of wheat, with a promise to consider more if the quality stayed consistent. It worked, and 2 of them placed orders. By the time Clara and Elias found a boarding house for the night, Clara was exhausted but hopeful in a way she hadn't been in weeks. "That went better than I expected," she said as they sat in the boarding house dining room over bowls of stew. "Told you it would work." "You were right." Elias smiled faintly. "Don't sound so surprised." Clara laughed. A real laugh, and felt some of the tension in her chest ease. They ate in comfortable silence, and when they finished, Elias walked her to her room. "Thank you," Clara said, pausing at the door, "for coming with me, for the idea, for everything." "You don't have to keep thanking me." "I know, but I want to." Elias looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then he nodded and stepped back. "Get some rest. We've got a long ride home tomorrow." Clara watched him walk down the hall to his own room, then slipped inside hers and sat on the edge of the narrow bed. She thought about the orders they'd secured, about the money that would start coming in, about the way Warren Pruitt's plan was slowly unraveling. She thought about Elias, and the way he'd stood beside her through all of it without asking for anything in return. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be all right. They made 3 more trips over the next month, each one expanding their network of buyers. Clara's produce started showing up in markets across 2 counties, and the money started coming in, slowly at first, then faster. By mid-November, Clara had enough to pay the inflated loan payment and still have money left over for winter supplies. She walked into the bank and slapped the payment down on the manager's desk with more satisfaction than she'd felt in years. The manager's face went pale. "Mrs. Whitmore, I wasn't expecting—" "I'm sure you weren't. This is the full amount." "It is, along with the interest you so generously added. I trust everything is in order now?" The manager stammered something about reviewing the account, but Clara didn't wait to hear it. She walked out of that bank with her head high and a smile on her face. When she got home, Elias was in the yard splitting wood. He looked up when he heard the wagon, and Clara climbed down with a grin. "It's done," she said. "The loan's paid." Elias set down the axe. "All of it?" "Every penny." A slow smile spread across his face. "Clara, that's amazing." "I know." She laughed, giddy with relief. "We did it. We actually did it." Elias crossed the yard and pulled her into a hug, lifting her off her feet. Clara let out a surprised laugh and held on tight, feeling lighter than she had in years. When he set her down, they were both smiling, and Clara realized how close they were standing. Elias seemed to realize it too, because his smile faded into something softer, more serious. "Clara," he said quietly. "Yeah?" "I meant what I said before, about staying." "I know. I don't just mean on the farm." Clara's breath caught. She knew what he was saying, had known it for weeks, maybe longer, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "Elias, you don't have to answer now. I just needed you to know." Clara looked up at him, at this man who'd come into her life like a storm and changed everything. She thought about Samuel, about the life they'd built together, and the hole he'd left behind. She thought about the guilt she'd been carrying, the fear that moving forward meant leaving him behind. But standing here with Elias, she realized that wasn't true. Samuel was part of her past, and he always would be. But Elias was part of her present, and maybe, if she was brave enough, her future. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I know. I don't want to mess this up." "You won't. You don't know that. I know you." Elias reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "And I know I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to." Clara's eyes stung. "I don't want you to go." "Then I'm staying." She nodded, not trusting her voice. Elias smiled and pressed a kiss to her forehead, the gesture so gentle it made her chest ache. "Come on," he said. "Let's go tell Noah the good news." They walked toward the house together, and Clara thought about the future stretching out ahead of them. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't guaranteed, but it was theirs, and that was enough. None. The story of Clara's success spread faster than the rumors had. By December, people in town were talking about the widow who'd turned her failing farm into the most profitable operation in the valley. Some were impressed, others were resentful. All of them were surprised. Warren Pruitt stopped making offers. Clara saw him once in town, standing outside his office with a group of men. He looked at her as she passed, his face tight with barely concealed anger. Clara met his gaze and didn't look away. She'd won, and they both knew it. That night, Clara stood on her porch and looked out at the fields. The harvest was in, the barn was full, and the mortgage was paid. Noah was inside doing his schoolwork, and Elias was in the barn tending to the horses. Everything she'd fought for, everything she'd almost lost, was still here, still hers. The door opened behind her, and Elias stepped out onto the porch. He handed her a cup of coffee and stood beside her, their shoulders touching. "You did good," he said. "We did good." Elias smiled. "Yeah, we did." They stood there in the quiet, watching the sun set over the farm, and Clara felt something settle inside her. Not contentment, that felt too passive, but peace, the kind that came from knowing you'd fought for something and won. "Elias," she said after a while. "Yeah?" "When this started, I thought I just needed someone to fix the irrigation line. And now?" Clara looked at him, at the man who'd become so much more than a hired hand. "Now I think I need you to stay." Elias's expression softened. "I already told you." "No, I mean really stay. Not in the barn, not as someone passing through." She took a breath. "Stay as family." Elias went very still. "Clara, I'm not asking you to replace Samuel. I'm asking you to be here, with us, for as long as you want." For a long moment, Elias didn't speak. Then he set down his coffee cup and took both of her hands in his. "I want that more than anything," he said quietly. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Yeah? Yeah." She smiled, and Elias smiled back, and for the first time since Samuel died, Clara let herself believe in the possibility of something new, something real, something worth fighting for. Winter came hard that year, the kind of cold that settled into your bones and made every morning feel like a test of will. But the farmhouse stayed warm, the barn was stocked with hay, and for the first time in 3 years, Clara didn't wake up in the middle of the night worrying about money. Elias moved into the house 2 weeks before Christmas. It wasn't a grand announcement. One evening, Clara simply said, "There's a spare room upstairs. It's warmer than the barn." And Elias nodded and brought his few belongings inside without ceremony. Noah was thrilled. He helped Elias carry his saddlebags up the stairs and spent the entire evening showing him where everything was, even though Elias had been in the house 100 times before. "This is where Mama keeps the extra blankets," Noah said, opening the linen closet with the gravity of someone revealing state secrets. "And this is the window that sticks. You have to push up and then jiggle it to the left." Elias listened patiently to all of it, asking questions and nodding in all the right places. Clara watched from the hallway, her chest tight with an emotion she couldn't quite name. That night, after Noah had gone to bed, Clara and Elias sat at the kitchen table with cups of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Neither of them had moved to reheat them. "This feels different," Clara said finally. "Good different or bad different?" "I don't know yet." She traced the rim of her cup with her finger. "It's just real now. You being here. Not as hired help, not as someone passing through. As family." "Does that scare you?" "A little." Elias nodded slowly. "It scares me too." Clara looked up, surprised. "Really? I haven't had a family in a long time. I'm not sure I remember how to do it right." "I don't think anyone does it right. I think you just do it and hope you don't mess up too badly." Elias smiled faintly. "That's comforting." "Isn't it?" Clara laughed, the sound tired but genuine. "We're a mess, Elias. Yeah, but we're a mess together." Clara reached across the table and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. "I'm glad you're here," she said. "So am I." They sat like that for a long time, the house quiet around them except for the creak of old wood settling and the distant howl of wind outside. When Clara finally stood to go to bed, Elias walked her to the bottom of the stairs. "Good night, Clara." "Good night." She climbed the stairs slowly, feeling his eyes on her back. When she reached the top, she looked down. Elias was still standing there, watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. She smiled and disappeared into her room, closing the door softly behind her. Christmas came quietly. Clara had never been one for elaborate celebrations, and this year was no different. She made a simple dinner, roasted chicken, potatoes, carrots from the root cellar, and baked a pie from the last of the preserved apples. Noah had made gifts for both of them. For Clara, a drawing of the three of them standing in front of the farmhouse, the lines wobbly but earnest. For Elias, a wooden carving he'd attempted himself, a horse that looked more like a deformed dog, but the pride on his face when he handed it over made Clara's throat tighten. "I've been practicing," Noah said, "like you showed me." Elias turned the carving over in his hand, studying it seriously. "This is good work. You're getting the proportions right." "Really?" "Really. Keep practicing and you'll be better than me in a year." Noah beamed. Clara's gift to Elias was practical. A new coat, heavy wool with good stitching, because she'd noticed his old one was wearing thin at the elbows. He put it on immediately, even though they were inside, and wore it for the rest of the evening. Elias's gift to Clara was a set of leather work gloves, the kind that would last for years if taken care of properly. She slipped them on and flexed her fingers, feeling the quality of the leather. "These are too nice," she said. "No, they're not." "Elias, you work hard. You deserve something that won't fall apart after 2 months." Clara looked at him, this man who noticed things like her worn-out gloves and did something about it without making a fuss. She wanted to kiss him. The thought surprised her with its clarity. Instead, she said, "Thank you. You're welcome." After dinner, they sat by the fire while Noah played with the wooden horse Elias had made him months ago, the one that actually looked like a horse. The boy created elaborate stories, narrating battles and journeys across imaginary landscapes. Clara leaned back in her chair watching him and felt Elias's hand find hers. She didn't pull away. "He's happy," Elias said quietly. "He is. So am I." Clara turned to look at him. "Yeah? Yeah." She squeezed his hand. "Me too." It was the simplest Christmas Clara had celebrated in years, and somehow the best. January brought new challenges. A late freeze damaged some of the fruit trees in the orchard, and Clara spent days pruning back the dead branches and hoping the trees would recover by spring. The work was tedious and cold, her fingers numb even inside the new gloves. Elias worked beside her, his breath fogging in the frigid air. They didn't talk much. It was too cold for conversation, but there was a comfort in the shared silence, in the knowledge that neither of them was facing the work alone. One afternoon, Martha Calloway showed up unannounced. Again. Clara was carrying an armful of branches to the burn pile when she saw the woman's wagon coming up the drive. She suppressed a groan. "Company," she called to Elias. He looked up, saw Martha, and his expression went carefully neutral. "Want me to stay?" "Please." They met Martha in the yard. She climbed down from her wagon with a basket in hand and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Clara, Mr. Boone, I hope I'm not interrupting." "What can we do for you, Martha?" Clara asked, keeping her voice polite but cool. "I wanted to bring you some preserves, a belated Christmas gift." Martha held out the basket. Clara took it, immediately suspicious. Martha Calloway didn't do anything without a reason. "That's kind of you. And I wanted to apologize." Clara blinked. "Excuse me?" Martha's smile tightened. "For the talk around town, I may have contributed to some of the gossip about you and Mr. Boone. It wasn't Christian of me, and I'm sorry." Clara studied her, trying to read the sincerity in her words. "What changed your mind? Seeing you at the bank? Hearing about your success?" Martha glanced at Elias, then back at Clara. "You proved everyone wrong, including me. I didn't do it to prove anything to anyone." "I know. That's what makes it impressive." Clara didn't know what to say to that. She looked at Elias, who gave her a small shrug. "Well," Clara said finally, "thank you for the preserves and the apology." Martha nodded. "I'll let you get back to work." She climbed back into her wagon and left. Clara stood holding the basket, staring after her. "That was strange," Elias said. "Very." "You believe her?" Clara thought about it. "I think she means it, but I also think she's only apologizing because we succeeded.
If the farm had failed, she'd still be gossiping. Probably. Does that make me cynical? It makes you realistic. Clara smiled faintly. I'll take it. They went back to work and Clara tried not to think too hard about Martha's visit. But it stayed with her for days. The idea that people's opinions could shift so easily, that success could buy forgiveness where honesty couldn't. It made her angry and tired. By February, Clara's produce had become something of a legend in the surrounding counties. Buyers came to the farm directly, willing to pay premium prices for her apples, wheat, and preserves. Clara hired 2 farmhands to help with the workload, young men from the next town over who didn't care about gossip and just needed the income. The farm was thriving, but Clara felt the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders. The constant work, the decisions, the pressure to keep the success going. One night she sat at the kitchen table with a ledger, trying to make sense of the numbers. She'd been working for 3 hours, and her eyes were starting to blur. "You need to sleep," Elias said, appearing in the doorway. "I need to finish this. It'll still be there in the morning." "So will 10 other things," Clara rubbed her temples. "I can't keep up with it all." Elias crossed the room and sat down beside her. "Then don't." "What?" "You're trying to do everything yourself. Hire someone to help with the bookkeeping." "I can't afford—" "Clara, you just made more money in 4 months than you made in the last 3 years. You can afford it." Clara opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. He was right. She'd been so used to scraping by that she hadn't adjusted to the reality of actually having resources. "I don't even know where to find someone," she admitted. "Ask around in Millbrook. Someone there will know." Clara leaned back in her chair, exhausted. "How do you always make everything sound so simple?" "Because it is simple. You're just too tired to see it." She laughed weakly. "I hate when you're right." "No, you don't." Clara looked at him, at the gentle teasing in his eyes, the way he'd learned to read her moods, the steadiness he brought to everything. She thought about the fact that he was sitting here at midnight, helping her with farm business, when he could have been asleep. "Elias," she said quietly. "Yeah? I don't know what I'd do without you?" His expression softened. "Good thing you don't have to find out." Clara reached for his hand, and he took it without hesitation. They sat like that in the quiet kitchen, the ledger forgotten, the world narrowed down to just the 2 of them. "Come to bed," Elias said finally. "The numbers will make more sense when you're rested." Clara nodded and let him pull her to her feet. They walked upstairs together, and when they reached the landing, Elias paused. "Good night, Clara." She looked at him, at the small space between their rooms, at the careful distance he always maintained. She thought about the way her heart beat faster when he was near, the way his presence had become as essential as air. "Elias," she said. "Yeah?" Clara stepped forward and kissed him. It was gentle, tentative, a question more than a declaration. Elias went still for a heartbeat, and Clara's stomach dropped, thinking she'd made a mistake. Then his hand came up to cup her face, and he kissed her back. It was slow and careful, neither of them rushing, both of them savoring the moment they'd been circling around for months. When they finally pulled apart, Clara's heart was racing. "I've wanted to do that for a while," she whispered. "So have I." "Why didn't you?" "Because I was waiting for you." Clara's eyes stung. "I'm ready now." Elias smiled, the expression so warm and open it made her chest ache. "Good." He kissed her again, softer this time, then pulled back. "But you still need to sleep." Clara laughed. "Always practical." "Someone has to be." He walked her to her door, kissed her forehead, and headed to his own room. Clara stood in the hallway for a long moment, touching her lips, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet in the best possible way. When she finally went to bed, she slept better than she had in weeks. What? Spring arrived with the kind of determination that couldn't be ignored. The frost melted, the fields turned green, and the fruit trees that had survived the winter began to bud. Clara and Elias fell into a new rhythm, one that included stolen kisses in the barn and quiet evenings on the porch after Noah went to bed. They didn't hide their relationship from the boy. There was no point, but they also didn't make a grand announcement. Noah figured it out on his own. "Are you and Elias going to get married?" he asked one morning over breakfast. Clara nearly choked on her coffee. "What?"
You kiss now, and you smile more. That's what people do before they get married, right? Clara looked at Elias, who was trying very hard not to laugh. We haven't talked about that, Clara said carefully. But you might? Maybe. Someday. Noah considered this, chewing his toast thoughtfully. I think you should. Oh, you do?
Yeah, Elias is good, and you're happy, and I like having him here. Clara's throat tightened. You really mean that? Of course I mean it. Noah looked at her like she was being dense. Why wouldn't I? Clara reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I just wanted to make sure. I'm sure. Noah looked at Elias. You're not going to leave, are you? No, Elias said firmly. I'm not going anywhere. Good. Noah went back to his toast. The matter settled in his mind. Clara caught Elias's eye and he smiled at her, the kind of smile that said everything without words. Later, when Noah was outside playing, Clara brought it up again. He's right, you know, she said, standing beside Elias in the barn while he fixed a broken bridle. About what? About us getting married. Elias's hand stilled. He looked at her. Is that something you want? I don't know, maybe. Clara leaned against the stall door. Does that scare you? A little. Why? Elias set down the bridle. Because I want it too, and I'm terrified of losing it. Clara's chest ached. She crossed the barn and took his hands. You're not going to lose me. You don't know that. I know I'm not going anywhere. I know this farm is ours now, not just mine. I know I love you. The words hung in the air between them. Elias stared at her, his eyes wide. You love me? He said, his voice rough. I do. Clara, you don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know. Elias pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her so tightly she could barely breathe. I love you too, he said into her hair. I have for months. Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. She held on to him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against hers. So what do we do now? She asked. We get married, if you want to. Clara pulled back to look at him. Are you proposing? I don't have a ring. I don't need a ring. Clara Whitmore, will you marry me? It wasn't romantic. There were no flowers, no grand gestures, just two people standing in a barn, covered in dust and hay, asking each other to build a life together. And it was perfect. Yes, Clara said. Yes, I'll marry you. Elias grinned and kissed her, and Clara kissed him back, feeling like her heart might burst. When they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling like fools. We should tell Noah, Clara said. He already knows. How? Because he's a smart kid, and he's been watching us. Clara laughed. Fair point. They walked back to the house together, hand in hand, and found Noah in the yard throwing sticks for the dog. We're getting married, Clara announced. Noah looked up, grinned, and went back to playing. Told you. Clara shook her head, laughing. Elias squeezed her hand. When? Noah called over his shoulder. Clara and Elias looked at each other. Spring, Clara said. After the planting's done. Good. I want to be there. Wouldn't dream of doing it without you, Sham. They were married in May, in the yard beneath the apple trees. It was a small ceremony, just a handful of people, most of them buyers and friends Clara had made in the surrounding towns. Martha Calloway came, which surprised Clara, but the woman seemed genuinely happy for them. Warren Pruitt did not attend. Clara hadn't invited him. Clara wore a simple dress, cream-colored with lace at the collar. Elias wore a new suit, dark and well-fitted, and Noah stood between them during the ceremony, beaming like he'd orchestrated the whole thing himself. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, there was only silence. When he pronounced them married, Elias kissed Clara like they were the only two people in the world. The reception was held at the farmhouse, with food spread across every available surface and music from a fiddle player Clara had hired from Millbrook. People danced in the yard, drank cider, and toasted to the couple's health and happiness. Clara stood on the porch at sunset, watching the celebration, and felt Elias's arms come around her from behind. Happy? He asked. Very. No regrets? Not a single one. Elias kissed the top of her head. Good. They stood like that, watching the last light fade from the sky.
And Clara thought about everything that had brought them to this moment: the loss, the struggle, the fear, the choice to keep fighting when it would have been easier to give up. She thought about Samuel, about the love they'd shared and the life he'd helped her build. She knew he would have liked Elias, would have approved of this, and she thought about the future, the planting seasons ahead, the harvest to come, the life she and Elias would build together. "What are you thinking about?" Elias asked. "Everything. That's a lot." "It is." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "But mostly I'm thinking about how lucky I am. I'm the lucky one. We both are." Elias smiled and kissed her, and Clara kissed him back, tasting apple cider and possibility. When they finally pulled apart, Noah was standing at the bottom of the porch steps, looking impatient. "Are you two done being mushy?" he asked. "People want to see you dance." Clara laughed. "We're coming." Elias took her hand and led her down the steps. They danced in the yard under the stars, surrounded by people who had come to celebrate with them, and Clara felt happier than she'd been in years. The farm was hers, the future was hers, and the man she loved was standing right beside her, holding her close, promising with every touch that he wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't a perfect life. There would be hard seasons ahead, challenges they couldn't predict, struggles they'd have to face together. But it was theirs, and that was enough. The summer after the wedding was the hottest anyone could remember, the kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the fields and turned every task into an endurance test. But the crops thrived. The orchard produced more fruit than Clara had storage for, and by August, they'd hired 4 permanent farmhands just to keep up with the work. Clara stood in the barn one afternoon, reviewing the delivery schedule with Thomas, the young man she'd hired to manage logistics. He was 22, eager to prove himself, and had a head for numbers that Clara appreciated. "We've got orders from 6 different counties now," Thomas said, running his finger down the ledger. "If this keeps up, we'll need a second wagon." "Then we'll get one," Clara said. Thomas looked up, surprised. "Just like that?" "Just like that. This farm supports a dozen families now, including yours. We do what we need to do to keep it running." Thomas grinned. "Yes, ma'am." Clara left the barn and found Elias near the south fence, supervising 2 of the farmhands as they reinforced a section that had been damaged by a fallen tree during a storm. He looked up when she approached, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "We need a second wagon," Clara said. "All right, I'll ride into Millbrook tomorrow and see what's available." "Thomas can go. You've got enough to do here." Elias studied her. "You all right?" "I'm fine, just thinking." "About?" Clara looked out over the fields, at the workers moving through the rows, at the farmhouse standing solid in the distance. "About how different everything is now. A year ago, I was barely keeping this place afloat. Now I'm managing a dozen people and trying to figure out where to store all the produce. That's a good problem to have." "I know, it just feels big." Elias walked over and stood beside her. "You're doing fine. Better than fine." "Am I?" "Sometimes I feel like I'm just guessing." "Everyone's guessing. You're just better at it than most people." Clara smiled despite herself. "That's not exactly reassuring. It's honest." She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her shoulders. They stood like that for a while, watching the farmhands work, feeling the weight of everything they'd built together. "Elias," Clara said quietly. "Yeah?" "Thank you for all of this. For staying. You don't have to keep thanking me. I know, but I want to." Elias kissed the top of her head. "You're welcome." By September, Clara's farm had become the talk of the valley. People who'd written her off as a widow destined to fail now stopped her in town to ask for advice. Farmers wanted to know how she'd turned things around. Women asked how she managed a business and a household. Clara answered their questions politely, but she never forgot who'd been there when she needed help and who hadn't. One afternoon, she was loading supplies into the wagon when Warren Pruitt approached. Clara's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. "Mrs. Boone," Warren said, tipping his hat. He emphasized the new name just slightly, like it tasted bitter. "Mr. Pruitt." Warren glanced at the supplies in her wagon, sacks of feed, new tools, bolts of fabric. "Business seems to be good." "It is." "I'm glad to hear it. I always knew that land had potential." Clara set down the bag she was holding and turned to face him fully. You knew it had potential. You also knew exactly how to fix it, but instead of helping, you waited for me to fail so you could buy it for nothing. Warren's expression hardened. That's a harsh accusation. It's the truth, and we both know it. I was protecting my investment.
You were protecting your wallet. There's a difference. Clara crossed her arms. Was there something you wanted, Warren? Or did you just come to pretend you're happy for me? Warren's jaw worked. For a moment, Clara thought he might argue, might try to justify what he'd done, but then his shoulders sagged slightly. I underestimated you, he said finally. Most people did. I made a mistake.
Clara studied him, looking for sincerity. She found something, not quite remorse, but acknowledgement. It would have to be enough. Yes, you did, Clara said, and I hope it cost you. Warren's mouth twitched, something between a grimace and a smile. It did. More than you know. He tipped his hat again and walked away. Clara watched him go, feeling a grim satisfaction. She'd won. Not just the farm, not just the battle to keep her land, she'd won the respect of the people who'd tried to take it from her. That night she told Elias about the encounter. How do you feel? He asked. They were sitting on the porch, the evening cool after the day's heat. Noah was inside doing his schoolwork, and the farm was quiet except for the sounds of crickets and distant cattle. Satisfied, Clara said, but not in the way I thought I would be. What do you mean? I spent so long being angry at Warren, at all the people who wanted me to fail. I thought when I finally succeeded, it would feel like revenge, but it doesn't. It just feels like I did what I had to do. That's because it wasn't about them. It was about you. Clara looked at him. When did you get so wise? Elias smiled. I've always been wise. You just didn't notice because you were too busy being stubborn. Clara laughed and swatted his arm. I'm not stubborn. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met. It's one of your best qualities. Flatterer. Honest observer. Clara shook her head, still smiling. She looked out at the farm, at the field she'd fought to save, the house she'd kept standing through sheer determination, the life she'd rebuilt from nothing. I used to think strength meant never needing anyone, she said quietly. Samuel died, and I told myself I had to do everything alone, that asking for help was the same as giving up. And now? Now I know that's nonsense. Real strength is knowing when you can't do it alone. It's letting people in, even when it's scary. It's trusting that they'll stay. Elias took her hand. I'll stay. I know. Clara squeezed his fingers. That's the point. You already proved it, and I finally believe it. They sat in comfortable silence, and Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. The losses, the struggles, the moments when giving up had felt like the only option. She thought about the choice she'd made, to keep fighting, to accept help, to let herself be vulnerable enough to love again. And she realized that was the real victory. Not the farm's success, not the money in the bank, not the respect of people who doubted her. The victory was in choosing to live instead of just survive. October brought the harvest, and with it, the busiest month Clara had ever experienced. The farmhands worked from dawn until dark, picking apples, threshing wheat, loading wagons for deliveries. Clara moved through it all like a conductor leading an orchestra, coordinating schedules, managing buyers, solving problems as they arose. Elias worked alongside the hands, never asking anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. Noah, now 10 years old and shooting up like a weed, helped where he could, learning the rhythms of the farm the way Clara had learned them as a child. One evening, after the last wagon had been loaded and sent off, Clara collapsed into a chair on the porch with a groan. Every muscle in her body ached. Long day, Elias asked, sitting down beside her. Long month. It's almost over. Thank goodness. Clara closed her eyes. I'm getting too old for this. You're 34. I feel like I'm 60. Elias laughed. You'll feel better after you rest. I don't have time to rest. We've got deliveries tomorrow, and I need to review the accounts, and… Clara. She opened her eyes. Rest, Elias said firmly. The accounts will still be there in the morning. So will the deliveries. You're no good to anyone if you work yourself into the ground. Clara knew he was right, but admitting it felt like surrender. She'd spent so many years pushing through exhaustion that she didn't know how to stop. I don't know how to do nothing, she said quietly. Then I'll teach you. Elias stood and held out his hand. Clara took it, letting him pull her to her feet. He led her inside, past the kitchen where the dishes still needed washing, past the study where the ledger sat waiting, up the stairs to their bedroom. "Sit," he said, guiding her to the edge of the bed. Clara sat. Elias knelt down and began unlacing her boots. "What are you doing?" "Taking care of you." "Elias, let me." Clara fell silent, watching as he removed her boots and set them aside. His hands were gentle, patient, and Clara felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. When he was done, he sat beside her on the bed. "Lie down." "I should lie down." Clara lay back, and Elias covered her with a blanket. She expected him to leave, to go back downstairs and finish the evening chores. Instead, he lay down beside her, fully clothed, and pulled her close. "We're just going to lie here?" Clara asked. "That's the plan." "But there's work. The work will still be there tomorrow. Right now, we're resting." Clara wanted to argue, but Elias's arms were warm and solid around her, and the bed was soft, and she was so tired. She let herself relax, let herself sink into the comfort of being held. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For reminding me I'm human." Elias kissed her temple. "You're welcome." Clara closed her eyes and, for the first time in weeks, let herself rest. Within minutes, she was asleep. Set. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling in mid-November. Clara stood at the kitchen window watching the flakes drift down and thought about the difference a year made. Last winter she'd been terrified. Terrified of losing the farm, of failing Noah, of facing another season alone. Now the barn was full, the accounts were solid, and she had a partner who shared the burden of every decision. Noah burst through the door, covered in snow, his cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. "Mama, can we build a snowman?" Clara looked at the dishes in the sink, the bread dough that needed kneading, the list of tasks she'd planned for the afternoon. Then she looked at her son's hopeful face. "Get your father," she said. "We'll build one together." Noah's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really. Go on." He ran back outside, shouting for Elias. Clara dried her hands, put on her coat, and followed him into the yard. They spent the next hour building a snowman, a lopsided, slightly deformed snowman that looked like it might collapse at any moment. Noah insisted on giving it a carrot nose and coal eyes, and Elias found an old hat to complete the look. When they were done, they stood back to admire their work. "It's ugly," Noah announced cheerfully. "It's perfect," Clara corrected. They went inside, cold and wet and laughing, and Clara made hot cider while Elias started a fire. They sat around the hearth, warming their hands, and Clara felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. "Mama," Noah said, his voice thoughtful. "Yeah, baby? Are you happy?" Clara looked at him, at this boy who'd lost his father and adapted to a stranger becoming part of their family with more grace than most adults could manage. She thought about everything they'd been through together, all the ways he'd grown. "I am," she said honestly. "Are you?" Noah nodded. "Yeah. I like it when you smile. You didn't used to smile much." Clara's throat tightened. She reached over and pulled him into a hug. "I'm going to smile a lot more from now on." "Good." Elias caught her eye over Noah's head, and Clara saw her own emotions reflected in his expression: gratitude, love, and the quiet amazement of people who'd found something they'd stopped believing existed. By the time spring returned, the farm had become something Clara had never imagined it could be. Not just a successful business, but a community. The farmhands and their families lived in cottages on the property, their children playing with Noah, their lives intertwined with Clara and Elias's in ways that felt natural and right. One evening in April, Clara stood in the orchard and looked at the trees beginning to bloom. The blossoms were thick and healthy, promising a harvest that would rival last year's. Elias found her there, standing among the trees in the fading light. "You're thinking again," he said. "I'm allowed to think." "I didn't say you weren't, just making an observation." Clara smiled. "I was thinking about the first time you saw this place, what it looked like then." "Rough." "That's generous. It looked like a disaster." "It looked like a challenge." Clara turned to face him. "Did you know? When you first rode up here, did you know it would turn into this?" Elias considered the question. "No, but I knew you weren't going to give up. That was enough." "What if I had?"
Given up, I mean. What would you have done? Found another widow with a broken irrigation line, I suppose. Clara laughed and swatted his arm. I'm serious. So am I. Elias pulled her close. But truthfully, I don't know. I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I just knew I wanted to help. And then I wanted to stay. And then I couldn't imagine being anywhere else. Do you ever regret it? Selling your ranch, leaving everything behind? Not once. Not even a little? Clara, you and Noah are the best thing that ever happened to me. Why would I regret that?
Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. I don't know what I did to deserve you. You let me fix your water line. That's not enough. It was for me. They stood there in the orchard, surrounded by blooming trees and the promise of another good season, and Clara felt a peace she'd never known before. Not the absence of struggle. There would always be challenges, always be hard days, but the knowledge that she didn't have to face them alone. Elias, she said. Yeah? I love you. I love you too. No, I mean, Clara pulled back to look at him. I love you in a way that still surprises me. After Samuel died, I thought that part of me was gone, that I'd used up my capacity for this kind of love. But you showed me that wasn't true, that there's always room for more if you're brave enough to make space for it. Elias's eyes were bright. Clara, let me finish. What I'm trying to say is thank you for being patient, for staying, for showing me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's trust, and trust is the hardest thing in the world. You're welcome, Elias said quietly. But you did the hard part. I just showed up. You did more than show up. You saw what everyone else refused to see. You believed when no one else would, because you were worth believing in. Clara kissed him, tasting salt from tears she hadn't realized were falling. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying and smiling at the same time. We should get back, Clara said, wiping her eyes. Noah will wonder where we are. Let him wonder. We have a few more minutes. They walked through the orchard together, and Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here, the grief, the fear, the moment when a stranger rode onto her property and changed everything. She thought about the choices she'd made, some out of desperation, some out of hope, all of them leading her to this moment. And she realized that was the thing no one ever told you about survival. It wasn't about being strong enough to do it alone. It was about being brave enough to let someone help you carry the weight. Summer passed in a blur of hard work and good harvests. The farm continued to thrive, and Clara's reputation spread beyond the valley. People came from distant towns to see the operation she'd built, to ask advice, to offer business opportunities. Clara took some of the opportunities and declined others. She'd learned to trust her instincts, to know when something would strengthen the farm and when it would just create more work than it was worth. One afternoon in August, Martha Calloway showed up again. This time, she wasn't alone. She had 3 other women with her, all of them looking nervous. Clara met them in the yard, suspicious but curious. Martha, ladies, what can I do for you? Martha cleared her throat. We wanted to ask your advice about our own farms. Clara blinked. I'm sorry, what? One of the other women stepped forward, Sarah Henderson, whose husband had died the previous winter. My farm's struggling. The crops aren't coming in like they should, and I don't know what to do. Martha said you might be willing to help. Clara looked at Martha, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. I know I wasn't kind to you, Martha said. I know I judged you when I should have helped. But watching what you've accomplished, it made me realize how wrong I was. And these women need help. Real help, not just sympathy and casseroles. Clara studied them. 3 women who were facing the same struggles she'd faced, the same fear and uncertainty. She remembered what it felt like to be alone, to have no one willing to do more than offer empty condolences. All right, Clara said, let's start with your irrigation. That's usually where the problems begin. Over the next few months, Clara helped all 3 women identify and fix the issues on their farms. She shared her contacts with buyers, taught them how to negotiate prices, showed them how to keep books that actually made sense. It was exhausting, but it was also satisfying in a way she hadn't expected. One evening, Elias asked her why she was spending so much time helping other people when she had her own farm to run. Because someone helped me when I needed it, Clara said, and because these women deserve the same chance I got. You're a better person than I am. No, I'm just paying it forward. You taught me that. Elias smiled. I didn't teach you anything. You already knew how. You just needed someone to remind you. Clara thought about that. Maybe he was right. Maybe the strength had always been there, buried under grief and fear. Maybe Elias hadn't given her anything she didn't already have. He'd just helped her remember she had it. By the time winter returned, Clara's life had settled into something she'd never thought possible. The farm was secure. The accounts were healthy. Noah was thriving. And every night she went to bed beside a man who loved her completely. One December evening, after Noah had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Clara and Elias sat by the fire with cups of tea they'd forgotten to drink. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped here? Clara asked. If you'd just ridden past and kept going? Sometimes, Elias admitted, but not in a way that makes me sad. More like I'm grateful I didn't. Me too. Clara set down her cup. I've been thinking about something. Dangerous. Clara smiled. I want to start helping more women. Not just with advice, but with actual resources. I want to create a fund that helps widows and single mothers keep their farms. Money for repairs, for equipment, for whatever they need to stay afloat. Elias looked at her. That's a big undertaking. I know. But we have the resources now, and I remember what it felt like to have nothing, to watch everything slip away and not be able to stop it. If I can keep that from happening to someone else, I should. You're serious about this? I am. Elias was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. Then let's do it. Just like that? Just like that. It's a good idea, Clara, and you're the right person to make it happen. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. For what? For believing in me, always. That's easy? You make it easy. They sat by the fire, planning and dreaming, and Clara felt a sense of purpose she'd never experienced before. The farm wasn't just hers anymore. It was a foundation for something bigger, something that could help people the way she'd been helped. Over the next year, Clara established the fund. She donated a portion of the farm's profits, organized fundraising events, and personally evaluated every application that came in. The first year, they helped 6 women. The second year, 12. Word spread. Women who'd been facing the same impossible choices Clara had once faced now had options. They had support. They had hope. And Clara, who'd once thought her only legacy would be a struggling farm and a son who barely remembered his father, realized she was building something that would outlast her. Something that mattered. Quote, 5 years after Elias had first ridden onto her property, Clara stood in the same spot where she'd first seen him and looked at everything they'd built together. The farm was still thriving. Noah was 15 now, already talking about taking over the operation someday. The fund had helped 37 women keep their farms and their dignity. And Clara was happy. Not in the uncomplicated way she'd been happy before Samuel died, but in a deeper, harder-won way. The kind of happiness that comes from surviving something that should have broken you and choosing to use that survival to help others. Elias walked up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. What are you thinking about? He asked. Everything. Nothing. Clara leaned back against him. How lucky I am. We both are. Yes, we are. They stood there in the quiet, and Clara thought about the lesson she'd learned the hard way. That sometimes the worst thing that happens to you opens the door for the best thing. That rock bottom isn't the end. It's just a foundation you can build on if you're brave enough to try. She thought about the women she'd helped, about the way their gratitude reminded her of her own journey, about how saving them had, in a strange way, completed her own healing. And she thought about Elias, about the stranger who'd become family, about the way one act of kindness had created ripples that were still spreading. I almost gave up, Clara said quietly. When the Westfield kept flooding and no one would help, I almost sold. I almost let Warren win. But you didn't. Only because you showed me I didn't have to. Elias turned her around to face him. No. You didn't give up because you're too stubborn to quit. I just happened to be there when you needed someone to dig a ditch. Clara smiled. Is that what we're calling it? That's what happened. You did a lot more than dig a ditch. And you did a lot more than let me. You chose to trust me. You chose to keep fighting. You chose to let yourself heal. Elias cupped her face in his hands. That took courage I'm not sure I would have had. You would have. You did have it, when you lost your family and kept going. We both did, I suppose. We just needed each other to remember how. Clara kissed him, soft and slow, and thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. How the worst pain could lead to the greatest joy if you were patient enough to wait for it. Come on, she said, pulling back. Dinner's going to burn if we don't get inside. They walked back to the house together, and Clara looked at the lights glowing in the windows, heard Noah's voice calling out about something he'd found in the barn. She saw the cottages where the farmhands lived with their families, saw smoke rising from their chimneys. She saw a life she'd built from ruins, a community she'd created from nothing, a future she'd fought for when everyone told her it was impossible, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that this was what mattered. Not the money or the success or the respect of people who doubted her. What mattered was this, the people she loved, the life they'd built, the difference they were making. That night, after dinner, and after Noah had gone to bed, Clara sat down and wrote in the journal she'd been keeping since Samuel died. She wrote about the farm, about Elias, about the fund, and the women they'd helped. And at the end, she wrote the truth she'd learned. Strength isn't about never needing anyone. It's about being brave enough to accept help when you need it, and generous enough to offer help when someone else does. It's about knowing that we're all just trying to survive, and that sometimes survival looks like letting someone fix your broken irrigation line. Sometimes it looks like trusting a stranger. Sometimes it looks like loving again when you thought you were done with love. The farm taught me that. Elias taught me that. And now I'm teaching it to others, the way it was taught to me. Because that's how we survive. Not alone, but together. Not by being invincible, but by being human enough to admit we need each other. Samuel used to say that good soil could grow anything if you gave it enough care and attention. He was talking about farming, but he was also talking about life. We're all just soil, really, capable of growth if we have the right conditions. And sometimes those conditions come in the form of a quiet drifter who sees what you need before you can ask for it. I didn't save this farm alone. I didn't rebuild my life alone. And I'm not helping other women alone. We do it together because that's the only way anything worth doing gets done. That's what I want people to know. That's the story I want to tell. Not about the widow who saved her farm through sheer determination, but about the woman who learned that determination isn't enough. That sometimes you have to trust. Sometimes you have to hope. Sometimes you have to believe that the stranger riding up your drive might be the answer you didn't know you were looking for. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that stranger stays. He becomes family. He becomes home. And everything you thought you'd lost forever comes back to you in a different form, teaching you that endings are just beginnings if you're brave enough to start again. Clara closed the journal and set down her pen. Elias appeared in the doorway, ready for bed. Coming? He asked. Yeah, Clara said. I'm coming. She stood and followed him upstairs, leaving the journal on the desk where Noah might read it someday, where he'd learn the truth about what his mother had survived and how she'd done it, where he'd learn that the best inheritance she could give him wasn't the farm or the money or even the name she'd built. It was the knowledge that you could lose everything and still find your way back. That help wasn't weakness. That love didn't run out just because you'd already used some. That home wasn't a place you protected by keeping everyone out. It was something you built by letting the right people in. Clara climbed into bed beside Elias, and he pulled her close. She closed her eyes and breathed in the familiar scent of him, felt the steady rhythm of his breathing, and she thought, for the last time that night, about the morning she'd found Samuel in the west field under that impossibly blue sky, about how that moment had felt like an ending. But it hadn't been an ending at all. It had been the beginning of everything that came after. The struggle, the growth. The moment when a stranger became family and a failing farm became a legacy. The beginning of learning that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what really matters. And what really matters is this. We survive together. We heal together. We build together. And if we're very lucky, we love again. We trust again. We hope again. We start again. And that's enough. That's always been enough.